family court, and then transitioned to the Albany County Public Defender's Office. So I've been there, it's actually almost 5 years to the day. It'll be 5 years around Christmas. Really started with the Public Defender's Office in Albany doing misdemeanors, very quickly moved out and started doing low-level felonies. Now I have 4 murder cases, 3 attempted murders, mostly serious violent felonies, a lot of individuals who suffer from mental health issues, things along those lines. So that's kind of what I'm specializing in at the moment.
Okay, Professor Farley.
Oh, yes. So thanks for having me here today. I started off, as you heard, as a corporate lawyer with Sherman Sterling in New York. I actually had a very narrow practice. I represented investment banks during their bridge loan period of really huge leveraged buyouts. And I developed a pro bono practice with not-for-profit corporations. So when I interviewed for a job at the US Attorney's Office in Washington, DC, the US Attorney at the time, Jay Stevens, asked me whether I participated in moot court in law school. No. He asked me whether I had done any litigation in when I was at Sherman and Sterling. I said no. He asked me what I was doing there, like why I'd been presented to him. I'd gone through all the interviews and was presented, and they brought me to the US Attorney's Office, the office of the actual US Attorney. So he wondered, I think, why people were wasting his time. I did tell him that I had as much litigation experience as any associate at any large law firm in New York. And I leaned forward and pounded his desk for emphasis, that is to say, none. And I think he liked my pounding his desk for emphasis, and I got the job. He wanted to make sure that I wasn't a shrinking violet, because lots of people do well in law school, do well on paper, but if they're in front of a jury, they shrink and can't really do it. So the US Attorney's Office for Washington, DC is the largest US Attorney's Office in the country because it doubles in as a DA's office. It is like a DA's office and a US Attorney's Office all in one. The good citizens of DC don't get to vote because they don't get democracy. And so the president who appoints the US Attorney is also appointing de facto the person who will act as the DA in Washington, DC, making the variety of cases I had a wild span from armed robbery to bankruptcy fraud, from murder cases to domestic violence cases. When rotated through every aspect of the office's operations, though I told them I wouldn't do any drug distribution cases in federal court because the sentences were too long. I also refused to do any prosecution of prostitutes, because I didn't feel people should be prosecuted for having been prostituted.
Professor Wetmore.
Okay, so I was a 2014 graduate, and I've only had one legal job. It's the one I currently hold as an ADA in Albany. I guess to add on to my career track, I'll begin what I started doing in law school. Right after my first year, I got a summer internship with my current office. Fell in love with it. Loved the people, loved the work, and I stuck around. I did a fall field placement in my second year. I did a Springfield placement my second year, and came back from there on out as a volunteer for my second summer and then my third year. And just stuck around, like I said, loved the work, loved the people. And fortunately, it turned into a job for me, and I was hired right out of law school. At the time, I think the job market was a little different than it is now, much worse than it is now. And I was very, very fortunate. It was very rare for someone to have a job when they were graduating my year. Fortunately, it's turned a corner, so I don't think that's really a problem these days. But so when I got hired, they put me into appeals, and the appeals was a place that I had not interned at all and really had no experience with legal writing, legal research at that level. It was more like the types of work many of you may do as an intern, is doing a research memo and then sending it to, your supervisor. It was that level of research. So that was a little intimidating. So I started in appeals and was there for a few years. During that time, your younger junior ADAs also get saddled with usually a busy local court. So I was in the town of Colony. That was my local court for a couple of years, which made for some very long days because that's a very busy night court. And from there, I rotated out to, we have a financial crimes unit. I was in that unit for a year. Then I transitioned into vehicular crimes where I am currently. So kind of throughout that track, the way our office is if you're interested in doing something that is not your regular responsibility, you can just reach out and someone will give you those opportunities. Those opportunities are there. And so I availed myself of that on a number of occasions. And got a lot of good experiences under a lot of different people. I handle kind of some miscellaneous things in the office. Some I asked for, some I did not. I currently handle fugitives in the office. I am involved in some complex investigations involving eavesdropping warrants and stuff like that. So I've developed a little niche and kind of some side stuff along the way. But that's pretty much me. I'm out of local court, which is nice. You think you got, I don't know, 3 years, 4 years or so, you pay your dues and then they take you out of that. So no more night court, which is nice. That's about it.
Okay, so our next question is, how did you decide you wanted to pursue a career in the criminal law in the public sector? Were there any types of experiences in law school that guided you towards this, such as any classes or internships that you took that, kind of pushed you towards this sector? We can start with Ms. Sokol, please.
So I think I fell in love with criminal law way before law school. I got involved in high school mock trial, loved it, continued on throughout college, also kind of fell in love and kept really kind of having experiences, in baby court, and you're kind of practicing and being in front of judges and things like that. And that was really cool. And in college, my high school mock trial advisor was actually the head of the major crimes unit in the Albany County Public Defender's or District Attorney's Office. So I got an internship there for 2 summers as a college student, which was fantastic. So I was basically doing everything the law students were doing with the exception of being in front of a judge. So as you guys know, you can't appear in front of judges before a certain period of time. I couldn't do that, which was very disappointing, but really did everything that they were doing. So I worked very closely on a number of pretty complicated robberies and robbery cases, actually one of which went to trial. And that was really what started me on that road. In law school, I kind of went in specifically thinking criminal law. I was already, I had an idea that was what I wanted to do. And, enjoyed crim law, but it's very different in real life. So you can enjoy a class. I knew what it looked like on the outside, which I think was helpful. So I knew that, it looked a certain way in a classroom, but I kind of knew in practical world what that was going to look like. So not only did a couple internships that were related to criminal law, but did a clinic through my law school. We had a kind of either prosecution or defense. I was actually with the prosecution one. Very much enjoyed it. I was with this little teeny tiny town court in the middle of Massachusetts where it was basically just people driving through and happened to get picked up because there's like a population of 10. But it was super fun. And I did bench trials and I, because it was so small, I was on my feet and I was handling these cases myself. And, doing things like that, I think really solidified my interest because you could actually see it in real life. You saw life past law school and said, okay, well, this is something I think is meaningful. I really enjoy it. And I think this is what I want to do professionally.
Professor Farley?
Oh, well, I don't know that I planned a career in criminal law. I really had a 5-year plan to become a law professor. But you never know what life hands you. And I thought it would be interesting. I'd had enough of doing securities regulation and doing corporate law. So I thought litigation would be great. And there's no better place to be a litigator than the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, because you did that mix of local and federal, and because they had a rotation through each part of the office. So I had days where I made an appellate argument, I argued briefs, I picked juries in state and federal trials, like all same day. You could do a closing argument, pick a jury, do an appellate court argument. And so you're running around all day, doing a lot of interesting things, getting the kind of experience that a large law firm like the one I had been practicing with, I couldn't give you in 8 or 9 years of carrying somebody else's bag. And I thought after doing that, I would be able to be a litigator on my own. I could go back to my old firm or some other firm as a partner, or I could go into academia. And the worst result would be I would know how to litigate. I thought that would be that was a good result. It was a tricky job though. My colleagues were, really skilled. They were hard acts to follow. I didn't believe in our mission. I don't think we were helping people when we were prosecuting them. No offense, but you see people at the worst moment of their lives, and nobody in court is doing something to help them through that moment. And the result, however it goes, whether it's an acquittal or a conviction, is not a good result for anybody, because the prison and probation don't make people better. So that was a lot to leave aside. I developed a subspecialty within the office. I was the saver of domestic violence cases, the resurrector of domestic violence cases. The office, when I was there, the Washington, D.C. didn't have mandatory arrest in domestic violence cases yet. And the police were in the habit of just telling victims of domestic violence to go to the Citizens Complaint Center where they could talk to a mediator or to an AUSA who might volunteer to be on duty as a mediator. I became that assistant U.S. attorney volunteering to be a mediator at the Citizens Complaint Center. But for weal or woe, I had a mission of trying to rescue their cases. I would explain to the victims why they were there and what they needed to do if they wanted to see their case taken seriously by the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Professor Wetmore?
Okay, yeah, I'm kind of in Rebecca's camp. I think I wanted to pursue a career in public service with respect to criminal law as well, but well before law school. I want to say it was probably in the high school kind of years is when I really started to get a little focused toward criminal law in the public sector. I come from a law enforcement family. So I was born and raised and really just only knowing that culture. It's just the way I grew up. But I knew at the same time I didn't want to be in law enforcement. I didn't want to be a police officer or anything like that. So in high school, my high school at the time, I had a program where it was a vocational program where you could take kind of a class. It was like a class in like professional development, and it had various different categories. And one of those categories was a criminal justice class. And it was actually a 2-year program. I took my junior and my senior year. And the first year was taught by a lawyer. And there was kind of a unit that we went over the court system. And it was very appealing to me. And I knew, wow, I really want to do this. I was just intrigued by the decorum, the professionalism, the aspect of presentation that comes with it. And that was, at least with respect to law, really started to appeal to me. And then probably once I got to college, the two just started to kind of fuse together. I knew I was interested in criminal justice. I was very interested in the law. And then the two just kind of started to take shape. And I took some classes in college with the goal in mind that I would ultimately be pursuing law school. And once I got here, I got my internship with my office, and I fortunately was having a good experience there, and said, this is what I want to do. I'm going to keep doing it. So I will say I got lucky in many ways that I kind of had an idea what I wanted to do. And I took those steps forward toward that, and I was happy. And here I am. So with respect to classes, I think that was part of the question.
Yes.
Too, classes and things. Definitely the field placements and stuff. That was that certainly helped me stay on track, because you could get credit for actually doing an internship, which was nice. And so doing that, and as well as there was a couple other classes I took that I really liked as well. One was a trial practice class that I took here. I was taught by, at the time it was taught by Professor Laurie Shanks, who a very seasoned criminal defense attorney. I think now it's taught by Matt Alpern, an equally seasoned criminal defense attorney. And why those were nice is they were taught by people who had a ton of litigation experience, and the courses were taught in a way where there was emphasis on practice, very much like the field placement stuff. So helping me kind of learn the mechanics in those areas, I think really, I don't know if it didn't like create a spark for me that, yeah, I want to do this, but it certainly helped me become polished and ready and able to do it, Does that make sense?
Yes, 100%. Thank you. Okay, so our next question is, what is the most rewarding part of working in the public sector?
Okay. There's a lot of them. I work with a very specific population of people, absolutely in the very worst moment of their lives, where very often, I mean, it's pretty awful where their family has sort of abandoned them, often a long time ago. I don't see a lot of people, I mean, especially young people coming in with parents. I deal with a lot of people dealing with really serious charges, with mental health issues, with drug addiction, people who really need a lot of help. And very often we go into court and I'm the only person standing next to them, and I'm the only person there to help them. And that's a really big honor. It's not always, it feels like sometimes everyone's kind of fighting against me at the same time, very often the clients included, but you can really, there's a potential of being able to do a lot of difference. So when and it doesn't happen all the time, but when I get a case that I can really make a difference in that person's life, maybe get them into treatment, get them on the right track, convince the DA that, we have to go a certain way in terms of rehabilitation instead of just punishing, and really make it so hopefully I'm not going to see them again as a criminal defendant. So hopefully, the justice system won't see them again and they can reintegrate and do something productive. That's really pretty special. So that's probably the highlight of what I do.
Professor Farley?
Well, if you become a prosecutor, you really need to remember that your job is not to win cases, it's to make sure that you do the right thing. So keeping track of your win-loss record means you're doing something wrong, right? You have to not be afraid, if you no longer believe in your case, to let the case go, even when the jury will convict the defendant that's sitting in front of them. And you'll feel pressure because you'll want to, if you play a chess game or checkers, you want to win. But you have to remember that winning isn't getting a guilty verdict. Winning is getting the best possible result that the system allows you to get for all concerned. The thing I think I'm proudest of my public sector work actually came after. I used to participate in something called Changing Lives Through Literature. It was a reading group for people who had been convicted of various crimes in Dorchester, Massachusetts. They could go to prison or have really long periods of probation, or hang out and take classes with me. So some of you who are in my class might think, oh, prison probation, I'll go for that. But these guys didn't know. They didn't have the views to read ahead of time. And so we would read great books and talk about them. We had a 10-week program. I told them, look, this isn't even pass fail. If you show up, my teaching partner and I, Taylor, the late great Taylor Storr of UMass Boston, and I would tell the students each term that they didn't have to read any of the books, that we, anarchists that we actually were, would sign off on their attendance sheets, whether they'd read or not read, and they would end probation, no matter how lazy they decided to be. We wanted to assure them that they didn't have to do this program, but we told them that there were lots of enemies of the program within the probation department, and that the program won't go away for them, but it would go away in the future if they didn't participate. So if they felt any solidarity with future people in their position, they should do the reading. And by and large, the students did, and they participated. A fine time was had by all. People from past terms would return, not as recidivists, but just as people who wanted to go do something constructive and talk about books at night. We had a graduation ceremonies in the court. They'd bring their relatives, they'd give a diploma, someone would give a valedictory address to the crowd. We had tea and cookies with relatives in chambers with the judges afterwards. And it made me realize that the entire system could be turned into reading groups. That group, Changing Lives Through Literature, had the lowest recidivism rate in Massachusetts. Even then, the program was still under fire. But you could make all of the system into schools. It could be carpentry, it could be reading groups, it could be any course of study you want to name. And you could find endless numbers of professors and teachers who would volunteer to do it. So I'm just planting a seed. That's something that you guys might consider looking forward to ways to get out of the punitive trap that we're in. But that was my most satisfying thing.
Professor Wetmore.
Yeah, I would say, so it's a very general answer from me. The most rewarding aspect of my job is really seeing cases that I've worked on, that a lot of people have worked on, come together to their conclusion. And what that conclusion is could vary widely depending on the case. And that's always rewarding to me, because I know whatever resolution is reached, I had a hand in it. It's partly due to me working toward that goal. Most of our cases resolve in some type of plea bargain of some sort. Sometimes they go to a trial. So having a hand in building a case, presenting a case, watching it come to a conclusion, to me is the most rewarding. And I'll just give an example. When I was in a local criminal court, I was in a very small village court, and we had a kind of a problem case. It was a DWI was the charge, and it was problematic in the sense that factually it was a very straightforward case, but it was problematic in the sense that there were a few different defense attorneys who had rotated through, and it just wasn't really going in any direction. And eventually we got a good in it, because it was alcohol related. Part of the goal was to get this person some substance abuse treatment. I believe the person had a serious alcohol problem. And because of the kind of rotation that was happening, and the case wasn't really going anywhere, and eventually there was a defense attorney who did enter the case, remained with the case, and we concluded it in, with a plea bargain that contemplated substance abuse treatment. But then typically what happens is, when you plea a case like that, there's sentencing, and then you really, as a prosecutor, you don't really find out what happens usually, unless there's something bad happens, pretty much. So that happened with this case, and I just kind of became familiar with it because it was a case that was kicking around for a while. And I was out to dinner one night, and I was kind of like the register getting ready to leave, and we were waiting. There was a bit of a line, and the person next to me was this defendant, and I recognized him, and I wasn't sure if he recognized me, and it was one of those moments where, like, I couldn't get out of there to try to avoid an awkward encounter. I had to stay based on what we were doing. And he said to me, aren't you an ADA? And I said, yes, I am. And he says, he introduced himself, and I said, oh, okay. I said, how are you? And he said, I'm doing well. And I just, it was very awkward. So I made a joke. I said, "You're not driving tonight, are you?" And he laughed. He said, no, my girlfriend drove me. And but he said, I really wanted to thank you for, every time we appeared in court. He said, "I knew you were a prosecutor, but you always, you never felt like you were coming at me. It never felt like you were out to get me. You were always very polite, very respectful. And we were ultimately able to work something out in my case where I had a problem. I had a really bad problem with alcohol," he said, "and I was able to get into some treatment." He said, "I was on the brink of losing my job at the time." And he said that just us having been able to work that out changed my life around. And that was very rewarding to me. And it's a conversation that a prosecutor usually, would not have with a defendant. And it actually only occurred by happenstance. And that made me feel like, I put some work into a case, I got a resolution, and it had an effect on somebody. And so no matter how our cases get resolved, other times, maybe you'll have a trial and the person who's hugging you and thanking you is a victim who was very, very wronged, and they're happy that they believe justice has occurred, and that can be rewarding. So whatever the outcome is, being involved in it, seeing how it affects people's lives, to me is the most rewarding. And I want to echo what my co-panelists have said here, that I think this is an echo, that when civilians, citizens, the public meets us, usually it's rarely on good terms. When the public intersects, when a public citizen's life intersects with our lives, it's rarely on good terms. It's something bad has happened, and we are involved in whatever capacity we come from. And so when you see cases come to a conclusion, to me, that is what's most rewarding.
Okay, so why have each of you chosen either prosecution or defense, whichever? So for you two, prosecution; for you, defense. Like, what led you towards that? Is there anything that pushed you towards one side or the other?
Me first again.
Yep.
No, I know. Wasn't aggressive enough. So I actually started law school thinking I wanted to be a prosecutor. I had interned in the DA's office. I had a clinic, in a DA's office, really enjoyed it. And I thought, oh, I could never work with those people. I just don't know how I'd, emotionally connect with a person accused of a crime. And then after I became barred, I ended up finding this solo practitioner who became my mentor, which I would highly recommend. Find yourself a mentor. It's the best thing in the world. So I kind of viewed my time with him as like a fellowship. So law school, I learned theory, you learn things that are not really practical. BC I loved, but it was very ivory tower, not very, hands-on, here's what you do with emotion. I got that through working with him. And one of the things that, he worked in criminal defense exclusively. So I was meeting people, on day one accused of all sorts of crimes, and really running the gamut from misdemeanors to, we did a number of murder trials together. And it, almost immediately, it was kind of like this lightning bolt, like, no, that's a person. I don't care what they're accused of. I don't care how awful they look on paper or how awful the DA is making them sound. That's a human. And very often the justice system forgets that. And it's my job to help them remember. So that's something that, I take to heart very seriously. It's something I learned very early on working with this gentleman. And, it kind of got me towards criminal defense in a way that I didn't want to leave. That's not to say I never would be a prosecutor if it was the right situation, the right office, their ethics aligned with mine. Absolutely no problems with that, because I think you absolutely can do the right thing as a prosecutor, with the right intentions, and again, with the right setup. But there's a lot of offices or a lot of really individual DAs that just, I think they are just looking for a win, or they prosecute cases where, the evidence isn't there, and they're just hurting people sometimes. Certainly not mine, but it's a risk. So, I certainly would not be opposed to being in a prosecutorial role, but what attracted me to defense was really that human connection. And yeah, you get that with victims and things like that, but not in the same way. You don't work as closely. I mean, I have investigators that work with my office, but, and they're part of the team, but it's me and the client. You learn to, but you really learn everything about that person. You are, in a lot of ways, they almost confuse you with a friend because you are there for them in the hardest moment ever. You're kind of increasing your time with them. I try to see them constantly. I have constant contact. I want them to know I'm here, in a way that a lot of people haven't been for them. And that's really cool when you can do that for somebody. And, even if we end up not with the result we're looking for, knowing that, you've been able to support them through a horrific time, hopefully you can still keep either fighting the case on an appeal or, I've had some repeat clients or actually I ran into someone in my office the other day who's being represented by another attorney, but I got a good result for him and he ran up and gave me a big hug and was all excited to see me. And, I left a good impression with him. Obviously he's still in the justice system. I don't know exactly what's going on with his life right now, but it's really an honor to be able to work with someone that closely and really try to do what you can for them. So that's why defense, I guess.
Professor Farley?
We're gonna stick with the same order. I actually didn't make a choice between being a prosecutor and being a defense lawyer. The day I was being sworn in as an AUSA, I received in the mail an invitation to interview with the DC Public Defender Service. So it was really who came to me first. I wanted to be a litigator, and at the time, it didn't matter sort of which I was doing. So the U.S. Attorney's Office got me an offer first, and I went with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I thought that, frankly, I could do more within the U.S. Attorney's Office than I was ultimately able to do. One does have the power as a prosecutor to say no to a lot of things, but you have to say no and be able to deal with what that means for you within the office. So no, I won't prosecute people for stealing food, right? Even if they didn't eat the food, if that addict stole food from the store and sold it, I'm not prosecuting them for that. Whatever the policy of our office is. No, I'm not going to prosecute people for decades of time for drug crimes that nobody would care about if they'd had more money or been white. So no, I'm not doing that. No, I won't prosecute this person anymore because I've now heard from my witness who has had to deal with this 7 different stories. Yes, the 7th story fits with the case we're trying to build to get a conviction, but it's the 7th story now. So I could pretend, as people often do, that this 7th story is part of a longer discussion, but it isn't. We've had 7 different framings of the facts, and now the 7th one is not the one I'm going to go forward with for the case. No, I'm not going to have an expert witness testify that there are no fingerprints from the packet of drugs that the police say they saw the defendant drop, because it is quote unquote impossible to lift fingerprints from plastic. We had an expert witness that actually said that. It's not true though. I'm not going to have him say that to the jury, and when I know that the thing he's saying to the jury isn't true, just because maybe it's true, or where you have reason to doubt your defendants, your police witnesses, like they've told you a story, it's easy to get to conviction. That defendant is going to get convicted, but there are holes in your officer's story that may not matter. How much does it matter? This guy was probably guilty on Thursday, even if he wasn't guilty on Friday, but it was Friday's crime he was arrested for, and they're forgetting details. It's odd to forget. So now, before it goes to a jury as a winning case, you've got to say, we're, withdrawing this, not going forward. Case over. They'll all get mad, and scream at you. Sorry, I'm flashing back to my last case at the U.S. Attorney's Office, which had me surrounded by my officers screaming at me, "You're questioning his integrity," pushing the smallest one forward. 5th grade at last. And the judge, after I shouted back at the officers, "I'm questioning all of you," say, "Take it outside, fellas." That didn't have the impact I thought it was going to have. You're not really picturing my dilemma. "Take it outside, fellas." So I'm just gonna, have a fist fight instead of like men with the 6 cops who are mad at me. "Take it outside, fellas." So that was my last case. But so it's a thing you need to do if you become prosecutors, especially. That there are limits. You have a lot of power, and you're right. Never take it personally. You're wrong though about it being a rare thing to run into people you prosecuted. That happened to me all the time.
Oh, really?
All the time.
That's funny.
And it was usually an encounter like the one you described, where they're actually happy to show themselves off. Because what they actually needed was a doctor, because they were like on a drug tear. And they want you to see them not on drugs. They were ashamed of the way they presented when they were in court. They see even the person who prosecuted them, and they're not thinking vengeance, which would be what I would have in mind, but they're actually thinking, "I just want you to see that I'm not that loser that was hauled into court before." And then they get the chance to do it if you haven't been taking the case personally, as if it's you versus some bad guy. When it's actually just a tough situation, and you're the one working it out on behalf of, in my case, the United States. In your case, the district, New York.
Professor Wetmore?
And the question was why prosecution over defense, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and it's probably not, an exciting answer. It was just the background that I came from. Those are kind of the interests that I was raised with, and I kind of just almost had tunnel vision, in kind of that direction toward that side of the system. But now that I'm here, where I'm grown up and I can make my own decisions now, why I continue to do this, why I like doing this, and one of the reasons I don't see myself switching from this is kind of like what Professor Farley said. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but prosecutors do have a lot of discretion to be selfless, to do the right thing. We're ethically obligated to do the right thing. And I like having that discretion. I like feeling like I have the ability to be more involved in like a big picture type of way of making changes. And I've never been on the side of defense work. So I can't say that I dislike it, that I would never do it. But I know me, and I know where my sympathies lie whenever I hear of some tragedy, and I feel like where I am is really where I need to be, where I should be. And it's largely because I think I have a greater ability to be selfless with my ideals where I'm at. So I hope that answers your question.
Yep. Okay, so we'll start with you this time, Professor Wetmore. So what does the average day look like for you in the public sector?
Very different. I saw that question. It's very different every day. And I imagine it's going to be probably a different answer for everybody too. It's very different. If you happen to be on trial that week, your average day is, you're going to in trial from the moment you get to the office to the moment you go home. And then, other days where you're trying to play catch up, for my job, it could be anywhere from, maybe I'll have a miscellaneous court appearance in the morning, like an arraignment or a sentencing or something like that. Then I'll have conferences or case preparation in the afternoon. Maybe I'll have a hearing in the afternoon. We have grand jury regularly, so maybe I'll be in grand jury as well. It's very, very different for me. I will say, just to give an example, this was a total one-off. Sean is somewhat familiar with this. One day, very recently. I started my day with an agenda in mind. I think I was working on a memo and I was like, I gotta get this memo done today. So I sat down in my at my desk, and law enforcement happened to be conferencing with someone else, and there was a violent crime that had occurred. And one of the things prosecutors will sometimes do, depending on the crime, is we will go to the crime scene, just where we can get a sense of what has happened. So that had occurred, and I was asked, do you want to go to this scene with us? And I said, sure. I said, I have a victim meeting at 2:00. Can I be back for that? And I said, oh yeah, we'll be back by 2:00. So we went to the scene. We're there until it was going on 1:00, and we were heading back. And on my way back, I got a call from my friend, and I declined it. I said, I'll call you later. And he was my coworker friend, by the way. And he wrote back, he says, are you here? He says, you're on the calendar at the appellate division for an oral argument. And I could not believe that was happening. It was my worst nightmare coming true. And how this had happened, by the way, is I used to be in appeals, was helping them out a little bit, like on the other side of the summer. And there was an oral argument that had been scheduled, and I missed the scheduling memo. Quite literally, I missed the scheduling memo. And so I my stomach, was turning, and I'm like, oh my goodness. And I said to my friend, I said, I will be there in 15 minutes. And he said,
That was a lot.
it actually was the truth. And we were able to get there within 15 minutes. The problem, though, is my case was the first one on the calendar, so they had to take me out of order. They were able to get me shuffled around a little bit. And I made it back here in Albany. And by the way, I had not looked at this case. I had not prepped for this case. And this is such a shameful story. I shouldn't even be saying it. But so I on the way back, on the ride back, I had on my phone, I was reading the brief on my phone, and I'm like, okay, I remember this issue. I remember that issue. These facts are coming back to me. And so we get to the appellate division, and I'm on my way in, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I don't have anything with me. They're gonna be so mad at me. They're gonna know I'm not prepared. And so fortunately it did not go that way. So I get upstairs to the courtroom, and my case was the second one that was called, and I was there for that. And fortunately, when you're in appeals, typically as a prosecutor, you go second, because if the appellant goes first, the appellant is usually the defendant who was convicted below. And so I was at another advantage, because I could hear the attorney's arguments and remember, okay, yeah, that's how they had argued it, and kind of push back on it a little bit there. So, and I stood up, and I will say I did apologize to the court. That was the first thing I said. They had actually started with a question on the merits. And I think it was before I even said anything. And I said, before I answer that, I said, I want to apologize, but I've been doing this for 6 years. I said, I've never been late for a court appearance. And this is so disrespectful, and I'm so sorry for it. And the court was so gracious, and they did not even bother by it. And so that was done. And so I do the argument, and I'm like, oh, it's almost 2:00. I got to get back to my victim meeting. So I got back to my victim meeting. Victim meeting spiraled out of control and lasted more than an hour. And then I had about an hour left in my day to do that memo, and it did not get done. So I had to do it the next day. So that was a day that I had recently. It's just very, very different. It's in my life, anyways. It's very, very different. So there you go.
I'd also like to add, he did a great job with the oral argument. Professor Farley?
Well, it's a long time ago, but I remember it actually compared to my corporate life as a walk in the park. When I was a corporate lawyer, I think I never left my office before midnight. And even then, I would look down the hallway to make sure none of the partners were still around, or the really senior associates, before I left. I had some friends that were on their way toward, it seemed, a rock and roll stardom, that they never quite reached it, but they were playing at CBGB's in New York. If you remember CBGB's, that's kind of a big deal for young rock and rollers. I never got to see them. I would always arrive after their last set. So I would go after work. I thought, I'm living a wilder life than the rock stars, but not a more enjoyable one. So when I went to the US Attorney's Office, it was busy. And I have to say, I think I was maybe a little bit less efficient with my time than my peers. So I would go in usually at around 7 or 7:30 and be the first one around. And I would leave around 7, and that would make me the last person to leave. I could have compressed that day, I think, easily by an hour on each end, but I would run in the morning. I ran again at noon to get a gym. So I would, if you were walking into the lobby at noon, you would see me sweating and shirtless walking through to go take my daily run, which is odd now that I think about it. But because other people weren't really doing that, but I was staying fit. It was an exciting day. You had to keep track of the calendar, and this was I remember having calendars with like dates scrawled in blood red all over my office. Like, on this day, your career is over if this isn't done. Like, you will be famous. All your classmates will know about it, and they will laugh at you. So, right, what's gonna happen? Like, this is what you were feeling when that moment came. A fun thing, the thing that was fun for me, I was available to argue other people's appellate court arguments. I just like doing that. So, and that might mean you get their brief that morning that you're gonna go argue that afternoon. So you're really flipping through it while you're doing the stuff you have on your own schedule to do other people a favor. But I found myself a quick read, or I found that for me, that was not a nerve-wracking thing to do. I like that part of my day most of all, not arguing my own appellate cases, but just arguing the one that had been handed from somebody else, sometimes on the way over to court.
Ms. Sokol?
So my schedule is much more civilized now that I'm out of local courts. So I think Mike and I had sort of a similar experience. I think I've been assigned to almost every local court in Albany County, and they're all very different, and some are civilized and hold court during the day. Some, I was out in Colony for a while too, and we'd go sometimes until 10:30 at night. Or I would have one local court that started at 7:30 in the morning, and then right after would be going to a second one, which would go until 8. So I'd be having these 12, 13-hour days. Oh, it was awful. I was like living out of my car. I used to say I was the RAV4 lawyer, it says the Lincoln lawyer. And like all my timesheets were like, the parking lot of Bethlehem Town Court. So that was ridiculous. But once I got past that, and now that I just do felonies, it's a lot more civilized. So actually similar to Mike's experience, I'm in court, not necessarily every day, but pretty often throughout the week. There's rarely a week that goes by that I'm not in court. And that's one of the appeals of this job, that I love being in court, love litigating. And there's always something that I'm needing to do. So, between that, I'm trying to kind of catch up. Most of my clients, because I represent pretty seriously accused individuals, are in jail. So, it's not like I'm having many office meetings, but I'm at the jail pretty often. Even with COVID, it was hard. I was meeting people over the phone, which was horrific, especially with individuals with mental health issues. Trying to get people's trust when they can't see you is nearly impossible. But now, I'm in the jail pretty often throughout the week, multiple times usually throughout the week, for a couple hours at a time. I'll schedule phone calls with clients. The one good thing COVID has done for the jail system is now I can schedule phone calls pretty easily on a secure line. So, in between court appearances, I'll schedule like half an hour here, half an hour here, so I can keep in touch with people a little bit easier for me. I also like going to crime scenes, not as timely, but my office has actually a number of really, really good investigators, which not just make my job easier, but they also make me a better attorney, because I have these ex-cops going through evidence with me, and going out and talking to witnesses if I need, and doing things kind of boots on the ground that I wouldn't be able to do, as I don't want to be a witness. And we will go to crime scenes. We will go talk to my clients sometimes to I have people that specialize in certain areas. So if I have a case that involves tool mark analysis or DNA or something like that, like I got an expert for that. So I can, go to the jail and say, okay, well, I'm your legal expert. This is somebody who knows a lot about ballistics, let's talk about it. And really, try to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page. Again, I like working as a team, with my investigators, my client, we become the defense team. So that's a lot of fun. So I try to keep in touch with my investigators, my clients pretty regularly. So I'd say most of my time is spent with them, which makes it a little hard to kind of schedule writing memos or, I have a motion that's due on a certain date and I absolutely have to get it in. And there's a lot of attorneys that like to ask for extensions and they like to, or they file things late, and I absolutely will not do that. So it becomes a little challenging. I think in Albany County, it's a little bit easier because they think the business day ends at 4:30, which is nice because court, I know for the most part, unless you're in a trial, will end at 4:30, and then I can do whatever I need to do after that. So it makes it a little bit easier for me scheduling, but I could have days where I'm at my desk the whole time. I could have days where, I'm running to see 18 different clients and then I just get assigned something that usually when I get assigned a case, it's one of two. It's either, okay, you don't really need to deal with this immediately, or, red alert, big problem, you have to run to the jail, we have to be in local court, we have to do this, and, try to go 0 to 60 immediately. So when I get those, it's kind of, you stop everything, work on that. But it's dynamic. That's one of the things I really like. I'm not chained to a desk. I'm not, clocking in 9 to 5 and only stare at my computer. There's a lot going on all the time.
Okay, and I have one last question for our panelists before we open up to our audience. So I'll start with you again, Professor Wetmore. If you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice for your success in the future, either as an attorney generally or as an attorney working in the public sector, what would it be?
I just thought you were going to ask that question too. Boy, did not prepare an answer. So I would say this is probably just more in line with the public sector theme, but I guess it's something that anyone could take. Is don't be afraid to fail. I think that fear plagues so many people, law students, lawyers. And I know it very much scared me, and it weighs on you. And that fear of failure can really take shape and make an already stressful job even more stressful. And I know my co-panelists could share this, but failure is a part of our reality. It doesn't mean you want to be negligent, but you should not let the fear of failure shape how you do your job, especially in public services. Public service and work in the public sector, in my view, is not for the egocentric, the people who are, refusing to fail, the people who keep tallies and scores of how many wins and losses they have. This area is not for those people. And if you have a fear of failure in the public sector where failure happens, this probably is not the role for you, because you need to be selfless. You serve the public, whether you are successful on a case or you fail on a case. You're serving the public, and that was something that it took me a little while to get a good grasp on that. And if I had to go back and tell myself that don't be afraid to fail, that's what I would say.
Thank you, Professor Farley.
Oh, well, if you get involved in criminal law, get a therapist, keep a diary, keep your options open. I didn't get a therapist. I didn't keep a diary. I did keep my options open. That is always, so I'll start with the third, always keep track of your career. If you're not learning stuff that you want to learn on your job every week, then you should really think about getting another job, because time doesn't wait. Your classmates are getting better every year. And so if you're not getting better every year, you're going to fall behind 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. can be the kind of mediocrity that you don't want to be. So keep track of what's going on with you in any job that you have. Make sure that you are learning stuff that you want to learn on that job, or if you're not, spend some healthy time looking to maneuver within the job to make sure that you are, or to look for another job so that you will be learning. If you're dealing with the heavy stuff that you'll be dealing with when it comes to criminal law, then really get a therapist. You may not think you need one, and then that's fine. It's just extra, somebody to talk to about what's going on. You don't want to be someone who has trouble in your life because of the trouble that you are consciously or unconsciously bringing home. You don't also want to be one of the folks who become very flat in their not just affect, but in their perception of how the world works. A lot of prosecutors, not you, so this is interesting, but a lot of prosecutors, most prosecutors, nearly all of them, have serious trouble looking inward, doing any kind of introspection. When you ask them about issues of justice, they usually can't talk to you, except in terms of the code. If this person did wrong, we want to prosecute them. And you don't want to deal with the issue by becoming that narrow. The issue is by becoming that narrow. Keep a diary. This helps you keep track of what you're learning, helps you keep track of what you've been through. It would be good to have that to use to look back. So those are the 3 bits of advice I had if you go into criminal law. Keep track of your career. When is it time to put up a shingle or go to a firm or do something else? Make sure you're learning. Keep a diary and have a therapist. These issues are too big to think you can just tough it out, because when you become tough, what's really happened is you've become shallow.
Ms. Sokol?
Actually, to build on that slightly, I almost find, because I work so closely with my clients, it's almost like they're, some of the phrases that we'll use is emotional vampires. So it's really hard to not get sucked into all of their drama to such a degree that it consumes me. You want to be empathetic. You don't want to lose that. I see defense attorneys all the time that are jaded, and that scares me. But, I tend to err on the opposite side. So I get too emotionally invested, and there's too many of them, and it's all consuming. So you have to kind of be able to step back, I separate myself, put up a little bit of an emotional wall when you can, and, do that in a way that you're not losing your empathy. But I guess my one piece of advice, not criminal law related, I don't know your experience, but in law school, I felt like law school destroyed my writing. I loved writing. I was an excellent writer in college. I did a senior honors thesis. I was a history major, loved it. Law school, I felt like destroyed my creativity. And you can't use adjectives. All of, everyone in the class, if your sentence doesn't look completely identical to your neighbors, you've done it wrong. And when I got into practice, and particularly working with this older attorney, I saw he didn't do that. He was creative. He was using adjectives again. He was, being a lot more creative with how he presented information, and that worked. And, no court is going to, at least the courts that we're in front of, no one's going to throw back your motion and say, okay, well, you didn't fit the certain criteria. So I allowed myself, it took a little while, because I was like, no, at school we were taught da. And you don't really, in real life, that's not always the best way of communicating. Your job as a lawyer, either public service, criminal law, elsewhere, you need to communicate an idea. You're making an argument, you're trying to be persuasive. And, there's different ways of doing that. For me, going back to my original writing style, absolutely was the way to go. I'm much more persuasive that way. And it took me a little bit of time to kind of figure that out and realize that law school was a very insular, kind of environment for that sort of thing. And in real life, I could take a lot more liberties.
Thank you. So now we'll open it up to anybody here in person or on Zoom that would like to ask any questions for our panelists. Yes, Aaron.
I know Professor Barley has touched on this already, but Tim, I'd like to ask, in your experience with the DA and the public defender, has there ever been times when you felt that even though you are working public service, that you actually feel as though you were like a good guy in that situation, and how you kind of grapple with that fact?
I've never looked at it as the good guy. Like, no, I go into court and it's like, judges are like, you are next to the rapist. And, it's like I'm tilting at windmills all day. So that's it's hard. I try not to, you don't want to internalize that because then I wouldn't be effective. But I mean, just today, I had a client's mother try to rush me in the courtroom. So that wasn't fun. But, that's rare, and most conflicts I have are with relatives who don't really understand what's going on. An individual wasn't super forthcoming about what the actual scenario was. And, they have all these perceptions. I don't know if you've heard the phrase, actually, this woman on the phone called me a public pretender. That's a cute one that floats around. They're, at the jail, there are different themes that you can see people talking about, like, you guys work for the DA, and, I'm apparently getting kickbacks for pleas. Apparently I'm not cashing in on that and things like that. I mean, like there are all these rumors even between, my own clients. There's a lot of DAs that I try to be very cordial with them. I don't go ad hominem. There's a lot of people who do. I try not to. I'm a professional. I expect you to be a professional. Doesn't always happen that way on the other end. So yeah, I wouldn't say that I perceive myself that way, but a lot of people do. And it's if I didn't have a strong sense of, I think I'm doing the right thing, it's hard to be in that environment.
Yeah, I agree. I have a very boring answer. The answer is no. I've never been in that situation. I know if I were in that situation, kind of coming back to the, the discretion that I believe prosecutors have, I could get myself out of that situation, if I were there. I don't answer to law enforcement or anything like that. And, we, by law, we have to be, acting ethically as prosecutors. And yeah, so I've never been in that situation, thank God. And if I were, I think because of the job I do, I would be able to get myself out of that situation. I would do that. Absolutely. Good question.
I have to say this, that I think we in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia did a disservice for the people of the District of Columbia. If we had closed rather than open for the 3 years I was there, I think DC would have received a net benefit from the closing of our office. So I think that we were in the business of manufacturing recidivism more than protecting people from crime. It looked on the individual day as if we were protecting people from crime because we were, with the aid of the police, catching, prosecuting, convicting, and incarcerating or putting under supervision lots of criminals. But we were also engaged in the manufacture of recidivism. So for every criminal caught, we manufactured more crimes than they would have committed otherwise, because they left the system worse than how they entered it. They just went right back to DC. So that's just a hard truth about the way prosecution works. My colleagues were this was not the wilding that you see people engaged in say, Florida or Texas. My colleagues were obeying all of the rules scrupulously, that they were within the code of ethics. They were doing all the best practices for the Justice Department. They were almost always on the up and up. But the truth is the daily functioning of the criminal justice system made any kind of wilding superfluous. The normal function of that system was to manufacture recidivism. And that's deeply problematic. I'm not saying don't go into it, but if you do go into it, understand that that's a system that needs to be remade utterly and completely. You might start with a few small steps, but the whole thing needs to be rethought. So just operating ethically within it is, if that's all you're doing, deeply problematic, because the whole thing is a problem.
Do you have any more questions from our audience? Lily?
So I guess for Professor Wetmore, this on the opposite side for Professor Farley, did you ever consider going into federal practice? And did you ever consider going into state practice? Or did you always know you wanted to do?
No, I've never considered it. Sorry, I'm giving like plain no answers. No, I've never considered it. I just, it's kind of one of those things of, this is where I found myself. I'm happy doing what I'm doing. I feel like I'm doing good work. And I'm seeing that sometimes, that's why I shared that example with you guys. And so no, I haven't. I don't know much about the culture. I sound like it's very good. But I'm very happy with, in the state system, working in local government. And here we are, although I will say, Albany County does not have a gym in our office. So, I mean, the amenities sound like they're better over there, but really, no, I'm happy where I am, and no desire to leave.
I'd consider it. Yeah, I ended up here first. I think it was a good move for me, this being in a medium-sized office. So we're not huge, we're not really teeny tiny. And some of the bigger offices, either DA, public defender, they have these like classes, like 100 people coming in at a time, and it's harder to get experience or to really stand out. I was very fortunate that, being in this environment, I was handling a homicide within a year and a half of me being there. And, you wouldn't see that if you went to a bigger office, either federally or on a state or local level. So, I think this office and being where I am gave me so much experience that I could then take elsewhere if I wanted to, or, either federally or someplace else that I wouldn't have gotten in a different sort of environment. But, my understanding that the quality of practice in federal court is a little bit higher. So, that would potentially be someplace I'd want to go in the future. I don't necessarily see myself staying at this office forever. It's not because I hate it or anything, but, I'm potentially trying to figure out like what's next, where else can I go with this? But, at the time, this is what opened up. This is kind of where I ended up. And, I think it gave me a lot of litigation experience that I would have gotten, possibly even on the federal side.
So I used to think that I had the experience of a federal prosecutor and the experience of a local prosecutor, because the U.S. Attorney's Office for DC did both. I found out when I entered academia that I really had the experience of a federal prosecutor only, because the local courts in DC were incredibly well organized. So the law on the books was the law in practice in those courts. And for most people who practice law, it's yes, what the judge you're in front of in a local court does is kind of sort of related to what the judge learned in law school, but it's really about the personality of that judge, like what goes on in that court day to day. So you got to learn judge so-and-so's law and judge this other judge's law, this other judge's law, and that's the way local practice works. It's we're not nearly as organized a society as we think we are, or as we represent to you in the non-clinical courses, like as you found out during internships and in clinical practice. It's all really, really messy and personal and marginally related to what's in the law books. And that's tricky. I think the cases I hated the most were the ones I had in front of pro-prosecution judges, because they will let you get into all kinds of trouble. Like eventually this is going to be appealed. Motion to punch the daylights out of this guy, Your Honor, granted. Like, oh, what, should I be doing this though as a prosecutor? It doesn't seem right. Yeah, so it's awful. You've been there, right?
Well, I've never been in that situation.
Okay, I was exaggerating for a fact. I've never actually put a defendant in a headlock with the judge. But it's often felt like that, where you have to think, oh, he's not watching out for the Court of Appeals. I don't want to become famous. What's the rule again? You just remind yourself of that. But that would only be an occasional thing for me. But that I think is always the case if you want to stay out of trouble in local practice. And it's rarely the case in federal.
Any more questions, Bevan?
So for the prosecutors in the room, I have follow-up for defense, but for the prosecutors in the room, have you ever been faced with a situation where you're handed a case and you feel like, oh my gosh, this person's innocent, and you don't want to prosecute? And then on the flip side with the defense, have you ever been presented with a case where you're like, this person is absolutely guilty? And how do you deal with that situation when it comes up?
Yeah, it's kind of in line with the other question we got. No, I've never been in that situation. If I was, I'm glad I'm in a position where I believe that my discretion that I have could get me out of it. If I have a case and I believe the person is not guilty, I'm making that assessment based on the evidence. I'm not going forward with that case. And as a prosecutor, I have the discretion to do that. And to me, that's the way it should be. So I'm sorry that's a boring answer for you, but no, I've never been in that situation. And that's how I would handle it if I was.
Yeah, so I've been in that situation and I've dropped those cases. So I just don't go forward with them. And I've discovered that mid-trial before and I'm just not gone forward with it. Because the case, ultimately, it's on you. And following orders can't be a rule you have when somebody's freedom is at stake. So if you're not a complete believer for a good reason, you shouldn't be going forward with that case. There was, I have to say, a thing that I've heard many prosecutors say that deeply troubled me, and I've never understood it. But I said, I know he's guilty, I just can't prove it. I would say to colleagues who I've heard utter those words, what are you talking about? Like, you don't know someone is guilty and you just can't prove it. Like, that's just the wrong way to frame it in your mind. It will lead you to making all kinds of mistakes. So you shouldn't worry too much as a prosecutor if guilty people go free, which will sound paradoxical, but most criminals are among us. Most crimes aren't solved, and we're getting along just fine. So the worst thing you can do is go after somebody who isn't guilty at all, or go after somebody more harshly than the crime they committed merits.
That's probably one of the most common questions I get. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't, I'm in a different position. I can't drop a case if somebody's guilty. And also I wasn't there. The person can tell me all sorts of nonsense, or I did this, I did that. On it, unless I saw it myself, I 100% don't know. So number one, my job is to defend that person no matter what. And there are different ways of handling that. Sometimes it's, okay, I know a crime technically did occur, but what can we do to mitigate it? So, was there something else in this person's background that made this potentially happen? Or, maybe we get them into drug treatment, mental health treatment. There's other routes, I call it the humanitarian approach. So maybe you're not fighting on the law, but maybe, we're doing something else. Or sometimes, I have someone who I suspect is going to be convicted at trial, but the DA and the police didn't do their jobs right. And that's just as important as, they need to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And if they do not, I don't care what that person did, they need to get released. And, if the police can just search someone's car arbitrarily, just because my client happened to have a bunch of guns in the back, what's to stop them from going after my mother or somebody that, had nothing going on. So, also, and on the flip side, a lot of defense attorneys don't ask their clients. I never specifically do, but if my client volunteers information, the more information I have, the better I did. So I don't like being surprised in court. I don't like not knowing what the DA has until they send it to me. I have investigators. I like doing my own parallel investigation. I like looking into things on my own. And if I have a client who's open and honest and telling me what's going on, very often I can craft a better defense, or I can figure out even a better way of chipping away at the DA's case. So, there's, I don't know, maybe I've had one or two cases where something is, or a person has bothered me to such a degree that you're thinking, I don't know if I can do this. But once you know what your job is. And again, my job is to defend that person, make sure that their rights are protected, and we do everything we can for that person. So if at the end of the day, we go to a trial, the DA proves their case beyond a reasonable doubt, everything happened legally, that's okay. It's not what I wanted, it's not what that individual wanted, but that's what the system does. Whether or not I think that they're guilty necessarily, that doesn't really change my approach.
Okay, so we've gone a little bit over on our time, so I think we'll let our panelists here.
Joel has.
Oh, Joel?
Well, I'm wondering, he was brief perhaps, but have you seen any crossover between defense and prosecution? And if so, what sort of reputation do those kind of people have who start during prosecution and end their career in defense, or start defense and end prosecution?
I don't think there's any issues reputation wise at all. Honestly, if you would ask me, I think most prosecutors, or I'd be really happy if all prosecutors started their careers as defense attorneys, or had an internship in another jurisdiction with a defense firm. A way that they start seeing individuals as people, it's not just a rap sheet. It's not just, oh yeah, this is the worst person I've ever seen, let's lock them up. And it gives them a better, well-rounded, decision. Very often, it seems like you mostly see prosecutors becoming defense attorneys. No real, I don't know. I don't think anyone has a really particularly bad reputation because they've done that. If anything, it's okay. I know what the DA does. I know how the grand jury works, and they bring that angle.
Yeah, I totally agree. That fact alone, in my experience, has never shaped anyone's reputation. People build their reputation, I think, in legal community based on how good of an advocate they are, how hard of a worker they are, and just what kind of person they are, not whether they've changed careers or anything like that. And I've seen cases where you've had people who are they have an exceptional reputation when they are a prosecutor, and then they decide they're going to be a defense attorney, and they have an exceptional reputation as a defense attorney. And I've seen people who have had bad reputations as prosecutors and go be defense attorneys, and they have bad reputations as defense attorneys. So their identity does not really, define them as who they are and what kind of worker they are. I mean, it's just what the kind of attitude that they bring to their cases and the work that they do for whichever side they may be on.
Yeah, I want to add something to that. Your reputation, though, is really important. Not your reputation as a prosecutor or as a defense lawyer, but your reputation as a lawyer. So you may often be tempted to gain an advantage for, let's say, your client, or maybe try to get a conviction by tricking the other lawyer, like, oh yeah, I'll agree to a continuance. And then you go in front of the judge and something like, we're ready for trial today, Your Honor. That's the worst thing you can possibly do. It may help one client one time, but it hurts every other client you'll ever have. And it hurts every other case you'll ever have, because people remember you as a liar. And they will tell everybody in their office that you're a liar. So the institution remembers you're a liar, and people won't trust you. So it's always good to just, be friendly, keep it professional, make your word your bond, even when, through no fault of your own, it's inconvenient to keep a promise. You really need to keep those promises once they're made, because life is infinitely better for you as a lawyer if, when you say something, the other attorneys understand that you won't change your mind about that.
Any final questions? We all set? Okay. we'd like to thank our panelists for coming out tonight. Thank you for your time so much. It was great. Oh, yeah. We have some gifts for you guys for coming in.
Oh, goodies. Wow.
Thanks.
Albany logs that come in the paper.
Oh, wow.
I'm happy- oh, wait, there's a coaster in here?
It's, yeah. it comes with-
Oh, happy day. That's
Yeah.
great.
Thank you